You know how absurdly racist America is when you realize that Donald Trump, pretty much his biggest campaign promise was that he was going to build a wall separating America and south of our border, mainly to separate us from Mexico. Hispanic people are a huge portion of the American population. Most of them are distinct from white people who hold power. And you think about this, like, we're taught about things like in pop culture, the Battle of the Alamo is like this great heroic thing, and uh, the spreading of Americans in the Americas is like this amazing thing. But you think about actual history of Native Americans and Hispanic people, they are indigenous to America. And there's extremely racist ideologies like white man's burden. It's the white man's burden to colonize the savage nations and spread our culture because our culture is the right one. So we pushed brown people, we rounded up brown people that were indigenous in America, and we slaughtered them, shoved them into reservations that are underfunded and lack infrastructure, rampant with disease, and still experience huge amounts of discrimination. Native American people go missing in the hundreds every year. And we pushed brown people out towards the South, and now we're keeping them out. And in southern states, there's so many racist policies where they stop people who look of Hispanic descent and demand to see their papers. They hold people in detention centers, the ICE, the immigration, I forget what the acronym stands for, the ICE, immigration control, whatever, hold people in detention centers in mass numbers without even charging them of a crime. They separate the children from their families, and there's very, like, so much of American rhetoric criticizing China about, in the Xinjiang, West China region, the re-education camps where they're rounding up Uyghur Muslims and most likely trying to wipe them out, at least culturally. I'm not aware of any direct evidence of slaughtering them in numbers, but there's plenty of evidence of rounding up people, heavily monitoring them, and human rights abuses occurring, like rape and all kinds of things. And hey, guess what? This kind of stuff is happening in America. It's neo-colonialistic racism on a mass level. It's contemporary to our time. It's happening right now that we pushed people out of their homelands, and then we caused an economic situation where they are deprived, and a lot of it relies on, a lot of the southern regions has to rely on the illicit drug industry. And guess what? America is the number one customer, and that fuels corruption and cartel violence, and then we made it illegal to come back. So, like, if you think about this as spanning generations, it seems like a very long time. And this is what I always say about things like slavery or indentured servitude or what we're talking about now. It's not a long time. Things can seem like they change very quickly, but what happened 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, it directly affects the shape of society and the world today. So these ICE camps, very little oversight. No one's making sure these people are, the border control people are following the rules. You have so many cases of children being separated from their families, kept in squalid conditions. And hey, a lot of them go missing. What do you think happens to the missing people? They're fucking killed. They're fucking killed. They're treated like animals. They're abused. They're raped. And they're killed because they don't belong here. They're not Americans. They're not good old boys. They're not our country, says the fucking pale-skinned Anglo-Saxon Nordic descended motherfuckers from the cold northern European regions of the world that fucking came over on boats and like a virus wiped people out. So yeah, it's extremely hypocritical for Americans to criticize places like China for that when we're not addressing things domestically and addressing our own human rights abuses. And there's even been accounts of forced hysterectomies, forced removal of women's uteruses in ICE camps. Now, I'm not a journalist or an investigator, and I don't know the legitimacy of these things, but there should be outrage and of these allegations, and huge investigations should be concentrated on these kind of things, because that is genocide. People are disappearing, being forcibly sterilized. What do you think that is? That's fucking genocide. And that's pretty much the whole platform. Like, I talk a lot about the discrimination that Asian people and black people face, but I think, like, yeah, for white nationalist people, a lot of times their go-to scapegoat is Jewish people, but at the same time, I feel like it's so insidiously ingrained in American culture to hate Hispanic people that a lot of people don't really seem consciously aware that it's happening, which makes me think that the big boogeyman is Hispanic people in America. That brown skin and speaking Spanish, and that's another thing. They speak Spanish because they were colonized way back when by the Spaniards. So it's really sad to think that South America is just, it's a lot like Africa. It's been pillaged and raped by colonists. And we're just trying to reach some normalcy. And what do we have in the modern contemporary era? We have people ranting about building a wall to keep out them dirty Mexicans and drug-dealing criminals because blah, blah, blah. It just goes to show that Republicans and the GOP, the grand old party, and Donald Trump and the Make America Great Again crowd, what do you want to make great? You want to make it great for white people to be openly imperialistic. And I talked about this when I was in a Southeast Asian country. This fucking white Australian guy just came up to me and started saying, we need to recolonize the world and blah, blah, blah. That's really what it's about. Like, equality for everyone feels like oppression for the oppressors, because they're so used to being able to abuse people that once people start claiming their own, they don't get to do whatever they want anymore. So they don't like that. So yeah, the build a wall bullshit is bullshit. And what we should be doing is trying to create a more equitable global society that reduces crime and the need for refugee immigration. There's a lot that needs to be fixed in the world. So, things to think about.